For the history buff in your family, Camp Nelson National Monument is a must-see when you visit Jessamine County. I'm joined by Ernie Price. He's a superintendent here at Camp Nelson National Monument. For people that may not be too familiar with the history here, tell us a little bit about Camp Nelson.
Camp Nelson is not well known among Civil War travelers, I would say. One of the reasons is because though we are a Civil War park, we're not a battlefield, which most Civil War parks are. But it gives us the opportunity to talk about a whole nother aspect of the Civil War, the logistics, supplies, commissary, quartermaster, the stuff that made the war happen, the machine, if you will. So that's what Camp Nelson started out to be in 1863. But in 1864, it became something much more special, and it's the reason that it's a national monument today. It became a recruiting and training station for what would be more than 10,000 African Americans, formerly enslaved men. They would become soldiers. They would form 8 United States Colored Troop regiments, as they were known then, but also women and children of their families. More than 10,000 refugees here at Camp Nelson seeking emancipation. So it's truly a special story that helps us understand the Civil War on a much deeper level.
Tell me what people can see and do when they visit here.
Once you arrive at Camp Nelson, we encourage you to start at the Visitor Center, where we can orient you to what's here in the park to see and do. Inside the Visitor Center building, there's a place to see a film. It's a 17-minute film that gives you an overview of Camp Nelson's history. We highly recommend that, because if you're not familiar with the story, and most of us are not, it's new to a lot of Civil War students, that's a good place to start. I'm actually standing in the museum right now where we are, and that's also available as part of the visit. Then, once you're outside, there's nearly 5 miles of trails that connect you to the different parts of the camp. The camp was large. It was 4,000 acres and over 300 buildings. It had its own bakery, its own hospital, prison, barracks, stables, corrals. They made wagons and harnesses and everything. At its peak, at times it may have been the second largest city in Kentucky. At its peak as an industrial machine, training soldiers, but also becoming a home for refugees as well. So these trails will connect you to these places, which today are largely archaeological in nature. However, you still can see the Oliver Perry House. It's a historic home that was officers' quarters during the war, and a series of earthen forts that were built along the northern edge of the camp to protect it from attacks from the north. The Kentucky River and Hickman Creek protected it from the west, east, and the south. So I would plan a time to do some hiking and some learning. And we're looking forward to, we are a new unit of the National Park Service, but we're looking forward to developing some programs and invite people out on the grounds and maybe spend a little time with the park ranger talking about what we're seeing out there on this landscape.
What do you hope people learn from their visit?
Ideally, after a visit at Camp Nelson, you can understand just how complex the Civil War was. Most of us know that it was complex, but here we're dealing with some of the hardcore questions of emancipation and enslavement, and what it meant that the war was fought and that it ended the way that it did. We're also exposed to the complications of what emancipation even meant. And even though people that had formerly been enslaved now were not enslaved, there were bigger questions about education, jobs, living, a future. And we see some of the hardest questions in our American experience can be discovered here at Camp Nelson. And we see that the legacy of Camp Nelson and of the United States Colored Troops, for example, is a legacy that may still be forming, even in 2021.
To get started planning your next trip, all you have to do is go to nps.gov/CANE.